There's always a better way to do what you're doing right now. So be grateful. Now they're just like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to do, right? And I was like, no, programmatic is where my heart is. Amen. Welcome to another episode of the Programmatic Digest podcast. I'm your host, Hélène Parker, and today we have a special guest, Brandon Pollard from Kortx. How are you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing pretty great. It's a fine Monday. You're by yourself at the office, and you just told me that you did not have to threaten nobody to leave the office, right? That you actually lucked out, but it's all good. We're happy to have you here. We're really excited to have a conversation with you today.
Absolutely.
So, before we get into today's conversation, I always like for the guests to introduce themselves because we really explain who we are best in our own words. So give us like your intro, where you started, how you got to where you are. And after that, we'll talk about exactly just that, how to transition and get started into programmatic advertising if you don't know what it is, if you don't know where to start, or how actually once you get into certain roles, it's 100% or close to 100% of being self-taught. So we're going to talk a lot of educational self-development in our industry after this, but I'd love to hear more about who you are, what you do.
Sure, no, absolutely. Again, Brandon Pollard, as you aptly introduced me. I'm currently the director of advertising operations at Kortx.
Okay.
I've been in programmatic, specifically campaign management and trading, since about 2014. Now, as I get older, I starting to forget how long I've been into it. But I I got in through my cousin's fiance, actually at the time, introduced me to a company called Add This, which a lot will remember was popularized sharing tools. And I essentially had the pleasant task of kind of taking some of the data that was collected through that company and executing digital advertising campaigns.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So my first role was literally called campaign manager. I came into it not knowing what an impression was, never even heard programmatic. And I feel like, at least anecdotally, that's a similar story. I feel like it's not one of those things that you go to school for, and you almost need to be introduced to it by someone. And for me, quite frankly, and it's kind of approach I've taken, is like you need to be mentored through it. Mm-hmm. So I had the fortune of having a really good mentor at the time who kind of literally taught me from scratch, let me learn and under-deliver and not hit goals and make mistakes along the way as I just kind of transitioned from originally doing TV advertising into programmatic. Like I kind of saw the tea leaves, saw where things were going, and wanted to make that transition. Spent a few years there, again, primarily in campaign management. I did really well, fostered some relationships, and then ultimately made the jump to the Washington Post to do a very similar job. It's called yield management there, being more so on the sales side. Again, lucky enough to be in have a similar supportive team where, again, allowed me as an ad operator, as a trader, to really not just push buttons, but to learn the entire kind of digital marketing sphere and really treat each campaign as trying to achieve a goal that's bigger than the CTR or the CPA. Fast forwarding towards today, and going back to the relationships I fostered at Add This, company Kortx was started, was close with two of the co-founders. They called me up and said, hey, we liked how you ran campaigns, remember your work in the past. Had both of me to kind of run and build the department from scratch, or probably before I was ready. But again, that's kind of the theme of my career, is just people really going above and beyond to develop me and having faith in me, and again, giving opportunity and I think really opening up this world to people who don't come from a traditional background, don't have that that pedigree of marketing and advertising. I certainly didn't. I very much leaned on mentorship and opportunity to make an impact.
That is so cool because, okay, so you started in the TV, the traditional TV world, right? Way back when. I started in print, okay, even though it was still the digital department for that newspaper. But then just like you, I literally fell into programmatic advertising because somebody saw my resume And they were like, this girl's going to be great for a programmatic trader position that was applying for media buyer in traditional media back in 2014 or 2015, one of them. And they were like, no, I'm calling you back to let you know you're not qualified for this position you applied. Thank you. But if you want to, we have this new digital department that we're building up. It's going to be about programmatic media. If you're not familiar, no problem. We're literally building everything from scratch. And that's how I fell into programmatic. I love what you said about having a mentor and having somebody you can look up to. Mine was my very first manager, Gabrielle. I always give him a shout out on the podcast anyway. He's on my night now. But he's the one who was like, okay, I love your energy. I know I can teach you some skill set. You're great. Let's go. And then from there, it's been literally me falling into agency world where it was kind of a startup mindset and like being one of the first traders and building up the rest of the department with like not only processes, but training and while servicing clients. So I love your story there. Thank you for sharing. I think I always love to ask this question because like you said, it's like one of those things that it's a really niched industry, but it holds 85% of digital advertising. Okay, and that's according to Statista. So if you're trying to look up the stats to use on your own, go Google it in Statista. You'll find a graph. But it's crazy that we're still so niche, right? $155 billion of spend in the US in this on a programmatic technology rather. So talk to us about getting started. So somebody's probably listening to the podcast like, I have no idea what programmatic is. What do you want to tell this person, like in terms of like, what is the top 3 things you want them to know when they first get started in this industry, whether it's a campaign manager, whether it's as you mentioned, which is a trader, or ad ops, or whatever it is, when you're starting in any new industry, specifically ours, what are the top 3 things you want the person to remember?
Absolutely. And it's something that hopefully one may not be as accessible. It might be more down to chance. But first thing, as I mentioned, is find a mentor or find a place that's going to foster your development, like not just in that role, but I just think as a marketer in general. One of the things that you said again that resonated with me was that like it accounts for programmatic, specifically accounts for so much revenue within like the digital and in the marketing ecosphere, but like it is treated really niche. I mean, part by design and the sales and marketing that's needed, but at the end of the day, it's a marketing job, right?
Yeah.
And marketing is one of those things that I think we all kind of inherently understand just through like living in this world to an extent. Like we market ourselves every day in one way, shape, or form. So really my first piece of advice is to, again, find a company that I think sees a programmatic role or specifically an ad ops role as such. And it's not a role where it's like, hey, I can hit the CTR, just learn this platform and that's it. That's really seeking to develop your mind for these things, necessarily like, hey, here's how to learn this platform. And then obviously, yeah, and also linked into that, again, mentorship, if you can. Again, that I certainly wouldn't be here, and I think a lot of us can say that without having a few individuals that kind of profoundly impact your trajectory. The second thing is like, for me, it's really develop your voice, right? One of the things I think this was before we hit record, I mentioned that like our current company's name, Kortx, like we removed the E, and it's just like one of those things that you do in ad tech.
You removed it.
One of the things I noticed when I jumped into ad tech is all the terms and the acronyms and abbreviations, and like it just made my head spin. Like my first 6 months of just learning what these things meant and just having my head spin in meetings and being grabbed back. So my first 6 months, like, let me figure out what all these things means. And I don't want to use those terms really. I just want to speak plainly. I want to articulate these things to clients who are likely going to be in the same boat as me, where they don't know every single lever in the platform or every single metric, and kind of be more approachable and not be this pretentious lord of platform knowledge on the back end. And then thirdly, again, I always be trying new things, right? Like whether that be getting into programmatic for the first time or learning things that are outside the scope of your job, especially when you first get started, because it's really easy to become inundated with whatever DSP you're learning, or again, your individual campaigns. But like those things will be fleeting; they'll change year to year. What you want to be keeping up with what's happening around you, and like those articles in Ad Exchange or Digiday, those things end up having an effect on your industry or your role at some point. Mm-hmm. So be pointed about like learning and try not to make it abstract. Try to apply it to your everyday job. If you read about a cool new attribution platform or tech, reach out to that vendor. Try it on one of your own campaigns. Really be pointed about learning. So
that's so good. Like, okay, so 3 things you said. The first one is finding a mentorship, and I think I'm gonna add finding a community. Okay, like when we started, it was 10 years ago. You said back in 2014, give or take. There were not a lot of people willingly open to talk about programmatic. And that is an absolute shameless plug. That's one of the reasons why I created a community where traders can come from different space in the world and talk about just that. Talk shop, like, hey, my CTR is not there. Why not? And I have I don't know, or my OTT CPMs are outrageous. I don't understand. Those type of questions. Or the most recent was about algorithm, like what's up with the DV360 algorithm for this particular placement or whatever it was. So this is exactly why, because I remember being in that position, just like you, and having to figure it out everything. And Google was helpful, but not as helpful as we think it was back then. I'm not trying to age me. I'm only 33. It won't there at all. Okay. Google was not there. And YouTube was certainly very far, especially in terms of programmatic. So we've done much better in terms of education. But that's one of the reasons why, I'm like, no, there has to be a way for me to keep learning from others, because I don't get to trade as much, but I train people who trade. And also, it's just like, when you work for a bigger company, you get lost. You're just a number. And so, yeah, they claim that we have a culture and whatnot, but ultimately down to that individual, if you're not able to really speak to their ability to learn and be themselves, like be authentic, then I don't know. I don't think we're doing a great job, right? It's about, how can you really live within your truth personally, so that when you're in professional workplace or environment, you get to really continue shining your light. And I love your number 2, which is finding your voice, because I think we don't do a good job at giving traders, entry-level people, or anybody that's actually managing y'all's $millions of dollars ad spend, a voice. Literally, I've had traders come to me and say, and I know they have an excellent, I know the company, I know they have an excellent company, but they just don't have the confidence. And I'm always like, how can I help you develop that confidence? Just like, well, every time I say something, I get this and that. Like, you should have known that, or you should look it up, or no, like, I mean, yeah, we should all look it up. But if I'm getting to a place where I have enough humility to come ask you, I may need to hold my hand a little bit longer. You know what I mean? It's cool. We're all human. So I love what you shared. I think it's really, really important. And then, of course, number 3 is staying curious, having like that investigative mindset. You're going to have to look up things up. Period. I remember looking at numbers, everything was great one day. The next day, everything was down to shit. And then you're like, what did I do? I did, what just happened? you look at you start talking to the computer, like, I know, what did you do? Like, what's happening, right? So you're gonna have to look shit up. You're really gonna have to go in.
Oh, sorry. I actually stole my 3rd was kind of from, I believe in your email, your tagline is stay curious. And that popped. Yeah. Because I was like, no, absolutely. The programmatic's too vast to know everything. It's impossible. There's literally a company that focuses on every single aspect of the chain. And then to me, working at a company now where again, our specificity, we don't have specificity in a specific platform of tech. So I kind of have to have a broad array of knowledge, and it's impossible to know the ins and the intricacies of every single piece of technology or campaign type companies. I have to be curious constantly.
And you're absolutely right. Like, it's almost impossible, but like yours, because you remember one thing one day and then literally like 3-4 days later, you're like, did I do that? Like, why did I do that? Like, it must have made sense in this moment if I did this, because it's not looking like it's making sense now. So what happened? So it's important. And that's when we talk about process and implementation internally. But it's really great that you're able to share this, because I know somebody's going to listen and be like, oh, this is me right now. And somebody else is going to listen and be like, oh, this is what is ahead of us. So let's talk about Kortx. Like, let's talk about, I know you said that you knew the co-owners before starting, but talk about some of the growth, talk about like the benefit of working for a Black-owned digital marketing firm. You guys represent both agencies and firms, which was great. So I'd love to hear more about some of the things you've learned that is probably different from working with a Black-owned firm versus like a, like a Washington Post on the publisher side. Like what's the biggest thing you think?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And as mentioned, like I said, two of the co-founders I actually met, again, kind of that community that we mentioned, kind of met through my first job originally. So again, importance of reaching out. They reached out to me. But no, it's been I mean, I will say this because I worked it now. It's been a dream company for me, just because of the everything that I've kind of explained, what kind of my ethos is part has been instilled by me, instilled in me by the company, but it's things that I personally believe. Things like, again, being curious, fostering a community of development and growth. All things Kortx has done a great job of facilitating for not only myself, but passed down to me to kind of distill to my current team and across the company. It's also, quite frankly, it's great to feel a sense of community with a smaller company and being Black owned. Our founder, Damon Henry, I didn't know before I worked here, but one of the things, and again, it's not necessarily always connected to being a minority owned business, but it was that sense of trust and again, care that I felt joining here. And again, the community that sometimes you don't always get that when you're at a Washington Post, or when you're like the only minority, or you are the only one of a certain background at a company. So again, going back to that community and that sense of trust and having somebody that cares about you, at least from a work sense, right? Personally, I'm sure they do too, but at least fostering a community that, again, that lends care to the individuals that work here, and it's not all bottom line, and just having a sense of purpose within a place, I think is extremely motivating in an industry like this, where you have to do the things we mentioned, like stay curious and be developing yourself, and need to be given a chance to do some of these things that we outline. And I mean, Kortx as a company itself, again, we're really service-based. Our core strength really is in our personalized and community approach, and we try to extend that obviously internally and externally with our clients. Like I said, we certainly have some tangible strengths, specifically there. Make sure I hit all the points for my for my team. But
somebody on the marketing team is gonna be like, let me make sure.
Yeah, I don't marketing to kill me, because it's this. Again, I didn't sanction having. Yeah, I didn't have a marketing tonight. But yeah, we certainly have some really core strengths. Damon, our CEO, as I mentioned, he's an engineer by trade, so we're really strong. We're underpinned by a strong data analytics team, the media execution side, which I work on, and a really strong creative services team. So those are the three kind of pillars in which we kind of execute that service-based vision. But the thing I like about working at Kortx is that like we try to take the approach that like we want to help you solve problems ultimately and create impactful campaigns. Again, we're not trying to sell you one audience or make you use one platform. We're really just want to, hey, what are your problems? Can we solve them? Or ultimately, if you're just day one as a brand or an agency starting an initiative, we want from start to finish to make sure that's impactful and play our part too. It doesn't always have to be all us. We just want to play our part and give you true, again, consultative and strategic advice on hitting goals. And and that approach is kind of how I run my team as well. One of the fortunate things, connecting what we were talking about with ad operators finding their voice, is this is the third stop that I've been at where like ad operators can have a voice. So I can talk directly to clients or internally and provide feedback from the campaigns that we're running. It's always blown my mind. When I've talked to colleagues in the industry whose, again, main job is to press buttons, which is like fine, but I think that not only stunts individual growth, but you're leaving out a huge strategic piece in operational perspective in evolving and growing the accounts that you do have. Like it's one thing to I think sign an IO and hit a goal, but it's like, what do you do from there? Have you demonstrated that there is real value and impact? And I think you have to tell the whole story. And again, leaving it just to sales or to your planning team or to the top, again, is I think it's short-sighted. And again, it's ultimately like you're handcuffing yourself at whatever you're selling or you're doing.
It's such a good point you just mentioned, because a lot of, some agencies that I talk to, even like brands, honestly, I work with in-housing brand too. And they all mentioned that, the ad-ops don't always know how to see through the eye of a client. Sometimes the communication is lacking, but my take is that they're the best person to explain what's going on. It's up to us as leadership to train them, to mold them into seeing through the eye of a client. And one of the biggest thing I do again is like when we train somebody, it's like we focus on those soft skills, which is presentation, writing, and communication. Like the communication skills, speaking, writing, and the presentation of it all. And it's a tough skill set to acquire, but it's not impossible. Anybody can write, anybody can look at those insights and determine the analysis, like how is your analysis going to pull into something that's going to speak to those stakeholders. So it's up to us to let them know, like, this is very much into details. They don't need to see every single CPCs for every single data segments. However, which one is performing really best and why, and that's all we want to tell them. So there's always an opportunity for growth anywhere. Anytime there's a challenge, I'm always like, this is a challenge because there's an opportunity to train somebody to do it better. Period. It's never, and sometimes the person, and I don't believe that the person just doesn't get it. I don't believe that. I haven't got there yet. I don't know what's your take, and you can tell me for real. But every time I had the opportunity to really understand how they learn, how they understand, then that's how they're able to do it themselves,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I going back to like finding your voice, and I think that's something that I would tell an individual, and then myself, as I have trained people on my teams, it's really to your point, like there is a way to kind of connect the dots. Like if it's not connecting, I think you have to take as a mentor, as a leader, or as a trainer, you have to take the responsibility to find that connection point, or to find a way to conceptualize what's happening. Because again, at the end of the day, this is stuff is like, to me, are just broad marketing concepts, again, painted by some of the tech that we use, really. And again, I'm a firm believer that everybody kind of understands marketing to an extent, and on some level. Can I find what level they've engaged or connected with it, and can I essentially bring whatever material I'm trying to teach, or whatever concepts I'm trying to change or train? Can I bring those things together? And yeah, that's the approach I've had with training on my team as well. We've had recently 2 people who, again, barely knew what an impression was when they came in, and both one's is I think about 8 months in, is excelling. The other one's about 2 months in, is already running campaigns. So again, this stuff, these things are definitely approachable. And again, I try to teach it through a lens of, again, just overall marketing, and not so much worrying about again the details of every single mechanism in the DSP. I think that stuff is learnable. Like, we all can use computers generally. So it's more so like understanding what buttons you're pushing and what they mean in the campaign.
I love that. Before we go into the closing segments, like, I want everyone to go on Kortx's website. I think it's kortx.io. So Kortx is KORTX.io. There's no E there because we dropped the E, remember? But like, when you go in the people's section of like, here's our team, meet us or bat us or something like that, like, the CEO or the co-founders are at the bottom of the page, which is super interesting. I've never seen this. Okay. If you are a company that does that, oh, we do that. Cool for you. I had never seen this before. It's literally super dope. And this is why, because it just shows that, the founders and leadership are putting their people first against their own self. Like, very often you always just see founder, CFO, VP of whatever, and then you'll see 1,000 of VP, and then you'll see the ad, you see everything else. And I think that's great. I wanted to give you all a shout out about that. I think that's really dope.
Yeah, sometimes they're not included at all too. So I'm glad. Like,
bro, I was like, man.
It's one thing to say like, hey, we're about community, but I think it's really important to like show, at least no matter how small, things like that, to show that like we do actually kind of
small things. It's small details. Exactly. It's a small details. That's really dope. All right, now let's go into our closing segments, where I like to ask some cool, fun questions. So let's ask you this. Give us one fun fact about yourself. What's one fun
fact? So I am a military kid, so I've lived in about 5 places. So that's a fun fact. I can run through them
Nice.
and stuff with them. And again, as I get older, I have to think about these numbers and things. Yeah, my father was in the Air Force, so I was born in Virginia, and then we moved to Montana, Germany, New Jersey, and then ultimately to Maryland, where I spent like the second half of my life.
Uh-huh.
So really transient kid, don't have a lot of lifelong friends. So I all my all,
Oh.
that,
I
that's
need
why community.
everyone listening to podcast to holla at Brandon so he can have more friends, okay?
Yeah, no, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm actually, yeah. If anybody wants to be friends, again, as you mentioned, community is really important. So yeah, send me a message on LinkedIn. All the friends I can get, I'll take.
No, I get it. I get it. That's really fun, actually. That's where my family lives in Virginia, Virginia Beach area. Me and my husband's family, that's where they are. That's where I moved. All right. Tell me the latest fun things you've done. Like, dang, I just did this and it was really great. And it's not something related to work. Like, we really just want to find out like what you do for fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I mean, it's not too crazy. So I'm a big traveler. I like to travel quite a
Uh-huh.
bit. This year, actually, I'll give you two. I don't know if it's cheating, but I went to Medellin, Colombia, and then literally just yesterday, I got back from Toronto with a
Uh-huh.
few coworkers, and it was a phenomenal time. I like to go loose plans, just like have maybe a few restaurants in the back pocket, and really just walk and
Yeah.
explore.
Yeah.
Um, Again, traveling is probably the coolest thing that I do in my life. Again, outside of work, just great to kind of get out and walk and heighten your senses to me.
Yeah. Do you have a traveling blog or a traveling podcast or something like that?
Oh no, I
A
don't.
traveling
No,
Instagram? Because those are a thing nowadays. Listen.
yeah, we have a travel Slack at Kortx, and
Yeah.
then one of the things I'm actually particularly bad is at documenting my travel. Because when I went to Colombia, they're like, "Hey, where'd the pictures?" I was like, "Ah, man, I took like zero pictures." So I do need to be a little more pointed about that. Yeah.
Sid, we gotta shut it off. We gotta shut it off, sir. No pictures of Colombia. Come on. Well, that shows that you were
Uh,
in the moment, so
Yeah,
I guess
yeah,
that's
I try to sound cool and earthy and say I'm just living in the moment, but really
yeah.
I'm just not thinking about it.
You just be forgetting to take
Yeah,
pictures.
yeah.
That is hilarious. Okay. So leave us with some word of wisdom. Again, talking to that younger, what is one thing, and maybe you already said it in the podcast, so I'm gonna challenge you to say something else, right? But what is one thing you wish you knew then that you now know? Like, what is one thing you wish you told Brandon as a freshman in the industry that Brandon senior in the industry knows?
Um, yeah, to make it different from what I said earlier, I'll say focus on what value I'm driving or being able to articulate
That's
what
good.
it is I'm doing and connect it back to marketing goals, right?
Mhm.
Like I know like vanity metrics receive a lot of scrutiny within our industry. And also not just from the vendor side, but from the agency side too, with all the
Yeah.
downward pressures like it goes. But at the end of the day, this stuff has to mean something. And when you're running that campaign, I would tell myself, like when you're running that campaign, construct, execute, manage that campaign, and provide feedback as if you were talking to like the CMO or the CEO and not like the media or the buyer on the other end. And now don't just spit out metrics. Again, articulate and communicate how you're actually contributing again to
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, how impactful you are to whatever their marketing goals are. And it doesn't always have to be bottom line. It's always, I think there's a tendency to be too simplistic and to think that every impression that
Yeah.
goes out has to lead to a sale. But
Mhm.
like you do want to be able to find impact and show like this is why what I'm doing is valuable. I think not only like externally where you're talking to clients, but internally too, as you try to grow your influence or try to advocate for yourself to have that voice. It's really have pride in what you do and know what you do is valuable. Explain that to people.
That's so good. That is so good. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for stopping by. That was so dope. There's a lot of gems. If anybody wants to reach out to you, how can they do that?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I believe my LinkedIn has my Kortx email. Again, looking for friends, so I'll even drop my email. It's Brandon at Kortx.io. Very simple, very ad techy.
Yeah.
Um, I'm again more than open to talk programmatic. Again, mentorship. I generally hire pretty frequently too. So if you
Ah,
are,
well, that's a plug right
yeah,
there, y'all. So
yeah,
definitely reach out to Brandon, or at least stay in touch with him. Stay in touch.
exactly. Stay in touch. Yeah, I got a little overzealous there for a second. At least stay in touch. Stay in touch. I'm happy to help her or offer advice. As somebody who came to this blind, I'm hugely sympathetic, and I see the value into bringing in a range of mindsets into this industry. It's one I enjoy, and it's one I like to think that I've had impact on, and I wouldn't have had that if there wasn't somebody who shared the sentiment that I'm trying to put it back out into the universe.
That's really great. Well, thank you so much for dropping by. We are definitely going to keep Brandon's information in all of the description right below this video, wherever you're watching, on all podcasts and on YouTube. Thank you for dropping by, Brandon, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.